People who were fine 1 minute then woke up in the hospital. What happened? Story 1. I was watching Pocahontas in a blanket fort with my stuffed animals, home from preschool because I had pink eye. The next thing I knew, over a week had passed. I was surrounded by doctors who were begging me to open up my mouth. My jaw was locked shut, and I had bacterial meningitis. My parents were there, weeping. My dad told me if I opened my mouth for the doctors, he would buy me a Barbie Jeep. I tried. It was impossible. Days later, I tried again, and part of my tongue fell out. I had bit it off during a seizure. Everyone was yelling, and I looked at my dad and said, "Where's my Barbie Jeep?" I have almost no memories from that time of my life, but the promise my dad made me was on my mind in every memory I have. My parents were told I would never be 100% again and likely have severe brain damage permanently. It was excruciatingly painful to move and do things for a while. But my dad kept reminding me that I could drive my Jeep if I kept at it. I remember watching him assemble it, but I wasn't strong enough to drive it. My personality was gone, but I just didn't care. I barely spoke for months and had to learn how to read, write, and draw again. Fast forward, I finished high school early, and I have zero health issues now. I genuinely believe my parents are to thank. The brain can heal really well, but they found a way to motivate me to keep healing constantly. Story 2. I was riding my bicycle to work when I got hit by a drunk driver going 45 miles per hour head-on. I would have been going about 20 miles per hour myself. I have no memory of being hit. I had a lot of injuries being such a traumatic impact. A avulsion fracture to the tibia, bruised lung, moderate brain injury, grade 4 out of 5 lacerated spleen, almost fatal, broken left femur, 2 vertebrae with compression fractures, broken left scapula, broken left clavicle, broken left second rib, and various scrapes, the worst being 6 by 1.5 by 1 inches. I've mostly recovered, but my left leg can't really be walked on. My left arm will never be what it was. The worst scrape was on top of the shoulder, so that muscle is just gone. She was drunk, speeding, and on the wrong side of the road. She tried claiming my lights were off, but they were still on at the scene. I don't know how I managed to survive. It was a collision of a total of 65 miles per hour. I wasn't even supposed to work that day either. Now the pain, my heavens does that hurt. The first vivid memory I have was when they set my femur into place, out in traction, without any kind of pain meds. I had lost so much blood I couldn't handle any painkillers at all. After that, once the adrenaline wore off, the pain was excruciating. I felt like I was breaking a new bone with every breath with all the injuries I had. The pharmacy had some issues, and I only got an opioid twice in line 4 or 5 hours. They only worked for like 20 to 30 minutes. Never really complained about it. No point. It is what it is. The driver complained about more in the first 10 minutes than I have in 10 months, cussing and screaming at me while I was laying there, dying. Story 3. I had a friend over for a puppy playdate, and I remember looking at the clock and thinking I needed to pack for a road trip because we were going to visit my fiance's family. The next second, I was being told to hold very still, and I was having some sort of scan done. That nurse was amazing because she managed to keep me calm the whole time. We were at a stoplight and rear-ended by a distracted driver. I completely lost 14 hours. I cannot remember them at all, just a complete black hole. The worst memory loss is that I have very foggy memories from about 2 months before the accident. It feels like you're trying to remember a dream, like you know something happened but have no concrete memories. This time period includes my fiance proposing to me, and I hate it so much that I cannot remember it. Finally, the entire school year before that, I'm a teacher, seems like a really long time ago. Like if I try really hard, I can have concrete memories, but it's like trying to remember a birthday party from 20 years ago. Everything before that is still fine and present. That was 4 years ago, and I still struggle with my memory. Watching the dash cam footage is surreal because I know that it's me, and I was awake and talking, but no matter how hard I try, I cannot remember it. Please, please, please do not text and drive. It is not worth the risk. The young man that hit us made a simple decision that completely changed my life, and I will probably struggle for the rest of my life because he was looking at his phone. I was having Groundhog Day every minute or so, and I would generally ask the same questions in the same order. Obviously, I would ask what happened, then how I got here. My fiancé and the ER nurses would make up new answers every time. Apparently, the one that got the biggest reaction is that I got there by a rocket ship. Story 4. I was maybe 16. I had asked my mom if we could go look at puppies at a pet store, because man, I love dogs. There were a lot of really cute dogs, but after being inside for a minute, I felt off. Not like something is extremely wrong, just sorta off. At this point, I figured that I was having an asthma attack, and since my rescue inhaler was in the car, I went to go sit down and use it. My mom came out a minute later and started driving me to the hospital because my breathing wasn't getting better. Woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed, with my mom and dad sobbing next to me. Apparently, I had a severe allergic reaction. My throat had closed almost completely. The doctor that appeared soon after my waking said that I was extremely lucky and gave me an EpiPen. Still don't know what I was allergic to, because even with insurance, getting allergy tested was way too expensive. Still is kinda too expensive. Still crawling out of medical debt now. Story 5. 1 month short of my 14th birthday, I was riding my bicycle home from school. 1 second, I was at the top of a steep hill and on the wrong side of the road. The next second, I was standing in the middle of the street. I reasoned I must have fallen off my bike. It was lying nearby, so I picked it up and tried to get back on. For some reason, the pedals wouldn't move. At this time, a bunch of people had come up to me, and they were all freaking out. I was confused at first as to why I was surrounded by hysterical adults until I happened to look down. That was when I finally noticed all of the blood pouring out of my face. So I let them guide me off the street while an ambulance was called for me. I spent the whole ambulance ride asking if I was going to get a shot. The EMTs kept giving me evasive answers, so I kept asking. I still don't remember what happened, but here's what I've pieced together over the years. While riding on the wrong side of the road, I passed in front of a stopped car. The driver wanted to turn right, so she was looking to her left to spot a gap in traffic. When she saw one, she pulled out, not realizing I was approaching from her right. She barely knocked me off my bicycle, but I was going over 20 miles per hour because of the hill I just went down. I hit the asphalt, face first, with no helmet. Story 6. Oh, I finally have one of these that I can answer. I've been a regular runner for 20 plus years. About 7 years ago, I was doing a half marathon. I live in Florida and have lived here my entire life, so I'm used to the heat and the humidity here and have always been an active outdoor person. You can probably guess where this is going. For this half marathon, the last mile goes along the park where the race finished. The last thing I remember is seeing the 12-mile sign. Half is 3.1 for those who don't know. The next thing I remember, I was in the ICU. I had gotten heat stroke with a body temperature of around 106 or so. Luckily, they got me to a hospital where they gave me ice baths and a ton of fluids. I had to stay for several days while my organ function returned to normal, but had no lasting effects. I do have a photo of myself crossing the finish line, despite not remembering anything past mile 12. Story 7. Was on the way to work on my bike. The last thing I remember is turning out of the driveway. Woke up 5 days later in a neurotrauma unit with 11 broken ribs, a shattered clavicle, a punctured leg, 8 stitches on my foot, 6 behind my ear, and permanent nerve damage. I have no recollection to this day of what happened. From the evidence, I'm pretty sure I was run over. There was also blood on my helmet visor from the wound behind the ear. I've had some parts filled in for me. The first hospital they took me to couldn't give me strong painkillers and risked putting me under because they didn't know what damage my skull had taken. CT scans were required. It took 4 hours for me to get to a hospital with a CT machine. 4 hours with a punctured lung. There's no video of the incident. It happened conveniently in an unsurveillance spot between 2 video cameras. Bystanders were of no help. At least, my brother and dad didn't collect any information from them that they shared with me. I suspected for some time that my then-girlfriend, with whom I'd recently broken up, had tried to have me taken out. While I was under, she turned up at the hospital and convinced my family that I tried to kill myself in a bike accident while wearing a helmet. At 6 p.m. rush hour traffic, half a mile from my apartment, where my dad was sitting, on the 10th floor. My brother and my dad believe her. They still think I remember exactly what happened, but won't tell them because I'm embarrassed to admit I was suicidal. The real irony? I never had suicidal thoughts until after I recovered and realized my own family chooses to believe an outsider over me. They still do. This is what betrayal is. Took years to move past those thoughts. Story 8. I was living in my own apartment at 18, working full-time and in school full-time. I was sick, thought I had a cold. I worked the evening shift and didn't remember doing any of the work, but everything was done. I went home, slept, and called my mother the next morning. She told me to go get some cold medicine. It's a damn good thing she did. The last thing I remember was getting ready to walk to the store around the corner. And then I'm strapped to a bed, blind and freaking out. I had viral encephalitis. I was in a coma for a couple of days and came very close to being dead. If I hadn't left my apartment, I would be for sure. My mother saved my life. The doctors thought I had overdosed, and my older sister had to convince them I was far too poor for drugs and that it was meningitis or encephalitis. She had seen it before in people she worked with. She saved my life too. My family truly thought I was going to die. When I woke up, my father asked if I knew where I was, and I looked at the straps and said, "Looks like the psych ward." My father started crying and said, "He's okay." Everyone assumed I'd have brain damage or be brain dead. I was okay, except I lost my short-term memory for a while. To say I was lucky would be an understatement. Story 9. I was taking the bus home from my mom's place. I asked a bus driver to stop at the house as it was just next to the road and I forgot a thing. I ran across the road and got hit by a car. They found me in a decorticate posturing. A few days, 8, in a medically induced coma. I was constantly spitting at the breathing tube, attempting to spit it out. Didn't appreciate that thing in my throat. I had a weird dream of a snake that had attached or bitten me in the mouth. At some point, I got tired of the situation, and I fought the snake. I eventually won and tore the snake away from my mouth, removing my own breathing tube. I looked at it dancing in my hand, and I threw it across the room to kill it. My family got all the diagnoses possible. Permanent brain damage, was unable to decide which side I wished to drool on, and forever living in a wheelchair. About 20 days after the accident, I went home and bicycled. I left the hospital after 28 days. During the entire venture, I was flying high on morphine. During my detox routine, I told the nurses I had a weird experience with a photograph on the wall. It was floating in or out, having waves as an ocean. The 2D image became 3D, then doing other trippy things. Today I'm living with a 10% disability condition. It cost me my dream of software development. Story 10. This was about 2 summers ago. My family has a total of 4 horses and only 3 we can ride. Our biggest and oldest horse, Hope, is an ex-racehorse. For some time I had been taking lessons from my stepmom. Hope was not fully trained and could only be ridden as a walk or trot. She also couldn't steer. Horses don't like wind, and it was really windy that day, leaving Hope a bit sensitive. When trying to get her into a trot, my stepmom had a whip and was just shaking it slightly. Hope jumped forward, so I instinctively held on with my legs. Bad idea. This caused her to freak out more. I was pulling back on the reins to try and get her to stop. When she finally came to a very harsh stop, I went off, backward. Not sure how, but I did. Landed right on my head. Hope proceeded to back up and step on my back. I got a concussion. That was it. I could have easily been paralyzed or even killed. I don't remember seeing anything in the hospital, but I remember hearing things. The earliest thing I remember seeing was the window at a Walgreens pharmacy. Also, I don't remember most of that day. This is just from what my stepmom told me. I braided my horse's tail, Faith, earlier that day and had no memory. I even remember in the hospital bed my stepmom telling me I did it, and I didn't know what day it was or anything. Over time, some memory came back from it, like I remember crawling out of the pen while gasping for air. Hope is a sweet horse. I should have been more careful that day. Story 11. I got in a car with a drunk driver. 3 days later, I woke up in the hospital with the doctors wiping some previously missed glass slivers off my back with baby wipes. It hurt. Apparently, I was awake on and off and even gave the police a full interview, but I don't have the memory past getting in the car. And the baby wipes 3 days later. I guess we hit a curb and instead of tapping the brakes, his foot hit the gas. When he finally sorted out that he was pressing the wrong pedal, he slammed on the brakes and we drifted into a set of concrete stairs going about 70. No airbags. I have one of those lucky to be alive stories according to most. Months later, the damage to my carotid artery healed and the scar tissue essentially sealed it off. I had a stroke. Don't drink and drive. Wear your seatbelt. Story 12. Was having heart issues for almost a year. Looked like bradycardia, heart beating too slow. Lots of tests, put on meds. One day I was going to go to the kitchen and get a knife to start cutting up chicken for dinner, and then I come to the floor. Roommate yelled my name. She said I just dropped. It happened a couple more times in the next week. The last time it happened, she said it looked like I was having a seizure, so she called 911. In the ER, get a CAT scan, chest x-ray, and ultrasound, and all come back fine. After a couple of hours laying in the ER bed, a nurse comes in to chart my vitals, and I start getting this huge head rush. I say, "Oh God," and she says, "Oh my God," and she runs out of the room. She came back with like 6 or 7 people, and now stuff is going crazy around me. They put these big contact pads for the shock paddles on me. Docs are yelling. Then it happened again and again. Pass out, pissed all over the floor. Doc comes in and tells me I'm getting a pacemaker in the morning. Turns out the fainting and head rushes were due to my heart rate just tanking, which would go from 80 to 90 BPM to 30. Spent 3 days in the ICU, and now I'm home with a heart rate in the 70s. I just wanted to go to sleep after the last fainting episode at home. Thankfully, the roommate called 911 and didn't listen to me. If not for that and the fainting stuff happening in the ER, I'd be underground right now. Story 13. I must have been around 9 or 10 years old and was skateboarding with a friend of mine, same age. This was the mid to late 80s, so of course we didn't wear any protective equipment like helmets or pads. There was a steep hill next to the school that his brother went to at the time, and later both of us. This school was junior high and high school combined. I went down the hill on my skateboard, and when I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital. My friend then told me that there was a stick on the path that I must have overlooked, and I fell. I was unconscious, and fortunately, his brother had an afternoon sport class at the high school, so he ran over to get him and their teacher. They brought me to a very nearby hospital, 3 minutes away, where I then woke up again. I don't know how long I was out in total, though. It was not the first or last time that I ended up in the hospital. My mom used to work in one, and they knew me there almost better as a patient than as her son, due to me getting injured by doing stupid stuff. But this was the only time I woke up in a hospital. The PE teacher did recognize me when I joined the school a few years later, and we got along really well. Story 14. I remember that when I was 16, at some point my head started to hurt very badly. Everyone closed their eyes and said, "Come on, everything will pass. Take a pill, everything will be fine." And at first it helped, but later I started to get sick, many times stronger. Darkening in my eyes and dizziness added to this. It bothered me, but I kept taking pills. But when I fainted for the first time, I told my parents about it. My condition was stable. I stayed at home for a week and then I went to school. I sit in class and I feel a headache, so sharp that I just had time to get up and grab my head. I woke up already in the hospital. As it turned out, I had an aneurysm ruptured, but I miraculously survived. The doctors said that there was only one such case a million is real. Now I'm 22 and I'm fine, but still sometimes this situation triggers me and I wake up in a cold sweat. Story 15. Was running through a field in the rain. Woke up a few hours later in the emergency department, ED. Apparently slipped and hit big rocks when I went down. My husband found me seizing. My next memory was puking in the ED and they flipped the table, so I wouldn't choke on it and I just kept apologizing to them. Didn't know my name, date of birth, anything, except that Clinton was president. I don't know why that stuck with me, but it was the one question I could answer. Brain trauma, concussion, of course, cracked my skull and 2 broken ribs, bruised lung. The main side effect is permanent neck damage I have to maintain, and the biggest issue, still can't remember names or faces unless it is someone who interacts with me consistently or is a consistent topic of conversation. I can pinpoint who you are if there is a connection made to an experience I've had with you, like that time we went kayaking at the Brazos in Texas. The Brazos won't mean anything, but kayaking in Texas would get me enough clicks in my head to pull the connection to you. Not your name, but I'll remember our relationship at least. Had a few weird experiences of people running into me in public, giving me a hug, and talking about how long it's been since they've seen me. I just play it off, hug back, big smiles, let them lead the convo, and hope they mention something that sparks a connection for me. Starting new jobs is scary because you're introduced to so many new people, and I won't remember a damn one for a few days at least. I often chant someone's name when I first meet them or I'm due to have a meeting with someone. Face and name combo helps me remember, so talking about someone in third person is really hard for me to retain. Nicknames or titles help a lot, like Big Boy or Director. but every once in a while I have a moment where it's all there. Names, faces, movie titles. They don't last long, but it always gets me happy, and I start digging into my memories until it's gone again.